Hey guys, introspection here. I know a lot of you guys are going back to school, so I wanted to give you a few tips and tricks that help me out, and I hope will help you guys out as well. First, make sure to have a set of backup clothing. I know it sounds like I'm being a little bit overprepared, but believe me, it can come in handy. Things can happen. It can rain. You can spill something. Somebody else can spill something. You can get sick. Somebody else can get sick. The list kind of goes on. So the first option you have, of course, is to keep it in your bag. If your bag doesn't have too much room to spare, here's what I recommend you doing. First, get a set of appropriate clothing that's really easy to fold flat. Then put it into a Ziploc bag and get all the air out, or at least as much as you possibly can. Then you can put it at the bottom of your bag where it won't take up too much room, and it'll be there if you need it. On top of that, since it's in a Ziploc bag, it's a lot less likely to get ruined or dirty. The other option people have, or at least other people have, will be the lockers. A lot of people will get the lockers and never use them, in which case, this is a perfect opportunity. Just make sure you get your set of clothing at the beginning of the year, and do not forget your underwear. You want that in your backup set of clothing. And maybe a sweater, depending on how cold it gets throughout the year. Then you will have it throughout the year in case you need it for whatever reason. Just make sure that you take it out at the end of the year. Don't just leave it there. Next, you want to make sure you digitally back up everything. I know your first reaction might be, oh, he's tech savvy. Only tech savvy people are going to make use of this. And I'll grant you, I am quite tech savvy. Not to an extreme extent, but enough that I can call myself that, I think. That being said, that's not really the only type of people that can use this tip. See, paper is super handy. For a lot of people, it's a lot easier to remember things on paper. And there are a lot of times where it's more convenient or appropriate than in its electronic counterpart. That being said, it's paper. It can rip. It can get wet. It can be accidentally crumpled up and thrown away. And via the laws of the universe, whatever assignment it is that you lost is probably going to be the one that just so happened to be the hardest one that you've done so far throughout the year. And you end up having to do it all over again. But if you scan all your things regularly, then you won't necessarily have to worry about that. On top of that, it might be easier to organize it via digitally depending on what kind of person you are. Furthermore, if you go ahead and take your notes out places, it might be easier to take your digital files out as opposed to a stack of papers. So yeah, it's just generally a good idea to digitally back up all your information, even if it's just for safekeeping. Now, there are a few ways, of course, you can do this. First is using a scanner. If you don't have access to a scanner, then don't worry. There's also an app, or actually several apps on just about every app store that I know about that act as scanners. It is worth noting that these scanners aren't quite as quality as an actual scanner, but for the sake of preserving the information on whatever paper you're scanning, it's more than sufficient. On top of that, it transfers it over to an actual document as opposed to an image format. Now, one of the most convenient ways that I know about is the Rocketbook. This guy actually showed up on my channel in my most recent video. I'll link that video and the link to the product down below. This guy's actually got a few tricks up his sleeve. First, it's a lot easier to organize everything when you're scanning this guy in. See, what ends up happening is that, let's say you create a note on your paper, and it's a science note. It actually has symbols on the paper that you can assign to different categories depending on how you decide to set up your digital backup system. So, for instance, let's say you create an entire science note page, and there are symbols on it. One of the symbols, just for argument's sake, is a rocket. You assign the rocket to the science section, and then you check it off. This way, whatever pages are checked off with the rocket will automatically be downloaded into the science category. And then on top of that, when the whole notebook is filled up, or even before then, you can stick it in the microwave. Make sure you read the instructions first. But you can stick it in the microwave and it'll erase the entire notebook over, and you can use it all over again as soon as that process is over. It only takes a few minutes if I'm not mistaken. This thing's about $22, depending on where you get it from. It's not too expensive, but of course there are the other two methods I mentioned, so you go ahead and pick one which will work out best for you. But if you want the Rocketbook, it'll be down in the description below. Next is studying. I actually dedicated an entire video to studying, where the difference between the myths of studying, scientifically proven ways of studying, scientifically disproven ways of studying, so on and so forth. But there's one that I particularly want to focus on. Overstudying or stressing out or overdoing it or overwhelming yourself. After a certain point where you study so much that your brain gets stressed out, it is a lot less efficient in absorbing that information. In fact, you become counterproductive as opposed to just allowing your brain to take a break, regenerate, reset, and then being far more capable of absorbing the information. Whether it's cramming like the day before, which is just not smart on its own, or even if you decide to just cram an entire week or 2 weeks before whatever exam it is you're preparing for, even then, you're not working anywhere near as efficiently as if you just regularly studied and allowed your brain to regularly rest and recuperate. You will become a lot more efficient, a lot easier to learn things, as opposed to putting yourself through all the pain and not even getting as much out of it as if you just allowed yourself to study properly. Now, the other thing involving studying is prepare to study. Let me explain what I mean by that. A lot of people do stuff like maybe listen to music. I actually just go into detail of which kind of music you should listen to in my video. But back to this. You could listen to music, maybe have a snack. I recommend something healthy. If you do those kinds of things, or if you have something else that you do for studying that helps you guys out, what I recommend you do is prepare to do that. So for instance, me personally, I'm guilty of doing this. I like to listen to music while I'm studying, but I don't really have a playlist set up, which means every time I go to study, I have to stop studying, search for a song, put that song on, start studying, and then of course it'll end, in which case I have to spend more time looking for another song, as opposed to me having a playlist prior to beginning to study, or already having the food if you like to eat a healthy snack while you're studying. Whatever it may be, just make sure you have that ready prior to the commencing of studying so that you become more efficient and be capable of using your time better. Next, I know this one's probably going to sound really obvious, and there's a really good chance you're going to start yelling at your smartphone screen, "That's obvious!" But I feel like I need to mention it anyways. Please, pay attention to the teacher and stop falling asleep in class. Now, I'm happy to say that, of course, not everybody does this, but I have personally noticed that a lot of the kids who do this have a really hard time learning. And of course, it's not because they have a hard time comprehending the material, it's just because they're not paying attention to the material. Now, of course, there is a very large amount of kids that even when they focus and pay attention, just generally have a very hard time trying to absorb the information. And in which case one must look into finding a different way or ability or method of absorbing the information different from the rest of the kids. That being said, a lot of the kids who do struggle with them, separate from that group of kids, will have problems with the subject, not because they can't comprehend it or are having a hard time comprehending it, but because they're not paying attention. And then, of course, a lot of times we will pay attention and it'll be in our heads, but we won't quite understand it. Trust me, it is worth the effort of going before or after school, depending on when your school teacher wants you to meet him or her, and asking for personal help. Since you are able to ask for personal help, they can focus on you directly and one-on-one, as such being able to customize your style specifically to you, as opposed to trying to teach an entire class. And usually we'll have the information in there, in our heads, but we'll just have a bit of a hard time comprehending it. Usually, for me personally, it took like 2-3 minutes of just explaining it, just to get that little piece that was just really nagging me to make sense now. And because of that, it usually doesn't take that long. Sometimes it does, but even then, it's usually worth talking to the teacher. Now, of course, we all have those teachers that do not have the best teaching style, in which case, well, that's a case-on-case basis. But for the most part, just talking to your teacher will usually clarify things. And finally, make sure to maintain a healthy body and diet. I know that, again, another one that you'll be yelling at me, "That's obvious!" But another one that I feel is very important to mention, because maintaining a healthy diet and healthy body will allow you to better use your mind, and it will better nutrient fill your brain, allowing it to better comprehend just about everything going around you. Well, guys, that's it for this video. Make sure to hit that comment section to give some advice to everybody else that's going to school that you might have. Otherwise, make sure to hit that subscribe button and catch my video in the next 2 weeks by hitting that bell button. Until then, hear nothing and listen to all. Bye guys!